continue with part 3 of Catastrophe Preparedness, What Every Business Owner Should Know, presented by the Professional Independent Agents Association of Ohio, and presented today by Jackie Reindl, CIC, CPIA, CPIW, National Faculty Member of CIC, also instruct and teach CISR, pre-licensing education, ethics, E&O, and other continuing and non-continuing education classes. We're going to continue our discussion on disaster preparedness, and today we're going to talk about hopefully preventing disasters, or if a disaster happens, keeping them within some element of control. So we're going to talk about all kinds of aspects of the business assets, from computers to recovery of paper and everything in between. And again, the idea here is to prevent, if we can, as much damage as possible should the inevitable happen. So let's talk first about one of the most important aspects of most of our small businesses are the computer files. One of the things that we should probably look or consider is that really this preventing disasters is about business continuation instead of disaster relief. So the whole goal here is to continue our business after something happens. Does that mean disaster relief as well? Absolutely. But let's look at it as business continuation so that we can keep bringing in money to continue paying our employees. On backing up computer files, you saw the statistics earlier that about 30% of businesses say that they back up to the cloud, but we still don't know what happens to the other 70%. So we do still have to worry about those and talk to our clients about what else are you doing if you're not using the cloud. Do you have off-site storage? What backup systems do you use? What's the retrieval method? And something that we need to consider for our own business as well as for our clients' businesses is that not all data is created equally. Everything stored on our computers, on our backup in the cloud is not vital. Some of it is absolutely critical to our business. Some of it doesn't have to be retrieved immediately. So the data has to basically be prioritized as well. We did that with our personnel. We have to do that with our data. When we're talking about off-site storage, same information, same rules apply about what's critical and what's not. And the reason we want off-site rather than the old method of putting it in your desk drawer at night is because it's highly unlikely that the off-site facility is going to be damaged at the same time as our facility. So having two separate facilities is vital to getting this back up and running, because if we lose it at our site, it's off-site and it's safe. Or if that facility is damaged, it's safe at our place. So off-site in some form or manner is critical. Computer configurations. Do you know where your licenses are? Do you know how to contact the licenses so that you can get the programs reinstalled? Are they up to date? Do you have the latest on your servers, if you have any on site? Do you have configurations for the machines so that they can be reconfigured, reinstalled as quickly as possible? It is nice to have reciprocal agreements. It's good to have your IT people on speed dial and to make sure that your IT people have a disaster plan in place as well. If you're down and they're down, not much is going to happen. So on the computer, there is no such thing as too much backup, but it is important to realize that not everything has to be retrieved immediately, and that has to be prioritized. Locating an alternative site of operation. First of all, we all like to think that our business must be operating the next day, But is it possible that you can go a couple of days without an alternative site? If the answer is yes, good, that will save some aggravation. But if the answer is no, what's been done to secure an alternative site of operation? Do you have, as many agents do, I'll use yours, you use mine, have you got a reciprocal agreement in place with another small business? Have you arranged ahead of time with a realtor, with other property owners, to be able to rent or lease something quickly and for a short-term basis? What you don't want to happen as a small business is to find out that when disaster strikes, there's no properties available for less than a one-year lease, and you may only be down for a couple weeks or a month. That would be an unnecessary expense. So having an alternative site of operation is important, and it may not even have to be another business building. You might be able to operate as a small business out of your home for a little while. You may be able to rent a trailer and operate out of there for a little while. If you need manufacturing equipment at the alternative site of operation, then it's important that that vendor be contacted prior to the disaster and be able to arrange quick replacement of that vital equipment. Emergency telecommunication services. Charges only last for so long, and unfortunately cell phone towers are often damaged at the same time that our business site is damaged. If they're down, may have to rely on landlines, may have to rely on some alternative form of communication. Do you have a backup plan in case the phone service is not available? Can you still use computers? Can you still use the cell phones to some extent? Do you have portable chargers so that should your facilities be down, you have alternative ways of charging your equipment? So all of this has to be taken into account should communications be terminated or minimally available, because following a disaster, everyone is going to be trying to contact everyone else. So there has to be a plan in place so that should that happen, you still have ability to contact and communicate with employees, with first responders, with vendors, with anybody critical to your business. Floor plans. Do me a favor, wherever you are right this moment, close your eyes. Now picture your office. Can you tell me with your eyes closed who is sitting where, about how many feet away, where is the exit, about how many feet away, where are you supposed to go? And if you can't, then floor plans are necessary. As part of this disaster manual that we've talked about, floor plans for the business are important to be part of the manual. The reason is because in the dark, in the rubble, you have to be able to find people and things. First responders need to be able to find people and things. So figuring out the floor plans, having them available, changing them when you add a wing or add a second story, very important to bring that up to date. Computer configurations we already discussed. So just as a reminder though, those are necessary to have to get your system up and running again. Operating guidelines for a disaster response plan involves a lot of detail and a lot of people willing to do a lot of detail. So assigning responsibilities is the first step. You have to assign duties for dealing with a disaster. We kind of talked about this a little bit in the second part of the webinar. We're going to talk about it a little more now, because now we're going to get into more of the nitty-gritty. All right, whose job is it to do what after the disaster happens? This can be everything from money to making the first phone calls, to assigning jobs, assigning who's going to clean up, but everybody has to have some kind of job assigned to them in a small business. If you have employees who are not going to have a job assigned to them relative to dealing with disaster, then they need to understand why, so they don't, quite frankly, get in the way of people who do have duties relative to the disaster. Everybody has to have some kind of job following this, because remember, you're dealing not only with the destruction or damage to the building and property, you're dealing with damage to people's psyche. So giving people a job to do following a disaster helps them heal and makes them more receptive and also more flexible in returning to normal. And that return to normal is just as important for the people as it is for your business. In fact, returning employees to normal helps your business return to normal faster. So find something for everybody to do if at all possible. One of the most critical parts is who's got the checkbook. Who is responsible for the fiscal or financial responsibilities following a disaster? There are suddenly going to be all kinds of things that have to be paid. Whether it's getting somebody in an emergency to clear out debris, whether it's hiring people, hiring drivers to get your people back and forth to the office, money is going to suddenly seem to be flying in every direction. Someone needs to be in control of that. Very often it will be the owner of the business. It might be the bookkeeper under the instruction of the owner, but someone has to be the go-to person for the money and to help determine what money does go out and what money needs to be spent first. Everybody will have a handout, rightfully so, but everything, just like data, is not created equally. Some items, some things need to be done first. So it is the job, that person's job, to determine the financial, not only responsibilities, but priorities. And that, again, if we have this planned out ahead of time, what has to be done first, what has to be paid first, makes this a lot easier at that time. Administrative responsibilities for a small business after a disaster. Administrative responsibilities can be everything from dealing with the insurance agent and or adjuster, getting the news out that yes, we've had a loss, here's how bad it seems to us, to then dealing with all the paperwork relative to the disaster, insurance paperwork, claims paperwork, filing all the appropriate forms with any kind of state, county, or national agencies relative to recovery. Someone is responsible for paper, even if it's not on paper, even if it's all electronic. One person has to be responsible for that. Otherwise, you have communications going everywhere. And you have 2 or 3 people trying to deal with the adjuster, or you have 2 or 3 people trying to deal with the bank, or 2 or 3 people trying to deal with the vendors. So, and the message then becomes very mixed, very confused. Confusion does not lend itself to disaster recovery or business continuation. So we have financial responsibilities, we have administrative responsibilities. Then there has to be somebody who's in charge of the physical recovery of the office and operations. Somebody needs to be prepared and willing and trained to take care of getting the cleanup done, and that may mean working with the administrative person or the fiscal person to say, how much do I have? What has the insurance company authorized? But they're actually in charge of getting the recovery done, of cleaning up, of getting enough assets back into the business location, whether it's the same or an alternative location, getting enough physical assets back that we can begin business again. So someone is in charge of physical, and that means somebody that's going to enjoy running around, taking care of things, being hands-on. That's what this person really needs personality-wise. Communications. This would be communications with employees, with other companies that you deal with vendors, with anybody that needs to know what's going on. Now, this communications person has to be able to work with both the fiscal person and the administrative person really, really well, because what they're going to communicate is what these people are telling them. So if my job is to communicate with employees, I need to know from the administrative person what their responsibilities are. I need to know from the fiscal person, from the financial person, how much money is available for employees, so I know how many to call back in. From the communications person needs to be very comfortable talking with the public, because they're probably the one that's going to be explaining to customers what is going on, what happened in as short a term language as possible, and when we expect to be recovered and back up in business, or here's what we can do now. So the communications person needs to be comfortable talking to a lot of different kinds of people, from employees to customers to perhaps the insurance people, anybody that the financial and administrative persons tell them they need to communicate with. They need to be able to speak the language. So they obviously have to be able to deal with stress, with anxiety, to calm people down, to soothe people, to encourage people, to even sometimes tell people in the nicest possible way to mind their own business and stay away until we get stuff taken care of. So the communication skills are important towards recovery, because they're going to keep things smoothly running, smoothly under control, by managing the message that comes out of the business after a disaster. So all of these people have to be assigned ahead of time, have to be comfortable with the responsibilities, have to be trained in the responsibilities. And training can be everything from communications training, working with someone who can, in the media, to understand how the message is best put across. Physical recovery could be trained with cleanup crews, work with FEMA to understand what gets cleaned up and how, because the physical recovery can get very complicated, as can all of this. But these people have to be able to work together as well, both internally and externally. Training required. You've got to determine the company guidelines. When we're dealing with this, who does the business deal with on a regular basis? Agencies, do you know who your best customers are? Would you know who to contact following a disaster at your agency? Who do I need to let know that we may not be available 24/7 anymore? Who does the business deal with on a regular basis that may need to be contacted? This is your client. Who may need to be contacted to let them know that we've had a small issue, we do plan on recovering, here's our plan for recovery, and we'll be back in touch with you X number of days to let you know how we're doing. So who do they deal with on a regular basis that they don't want to leave in the dark? What are their emergency plans? If they are dealing with somebody on a regular basis, they probably need to understand, or at least ask, about the emergency plans of that regular business they deal with, because they may be impacted, and if I can't fulfill a contract, what are their plans for getting that contract fulfilled, and what does that mean to me in the short term? Who else does the business need to contact on a regular basis? Do they need, obviously, first responders? Do they need to contact employees, and in what order? What does the company need to do to notify as many people as necessary that things have changed, that priorities may have shifted a bit, and that here's where we are now, and here's where we may expect to be tomorrow? Who needs to be notified? If I'm a small business, I know I have a list of key customers that I don't want to hear about my problems from anybody else. So we need to figure all this out, or help the client figure all that out, so that they have that handy. Agents, you need to keep a list of key company contacts for use during an emergency, as well as understanding what the company's catastrophe plans are. You need to keep a list of key company contacts so that you can let them know that, hey, there's been a problem in this town and in this county, there's going to be serious issues. Prioritize recovery and restoration processes. This is sometimes where it gets difficult, because even in a small business, every department, as small as the departments might be, think that they're most critical to recovery. And so some hard choices are going to have to be made here. We start with computerized, since most businesses do have some form of computerization. What computerized operations need to be restored first? At this location, what data needs to be retrieved first? Are we worried about our accounting first, our client list first? What has to be restored first? And work on that. After the computerization, what services or items are most important to the survival of the business? In other words, what do I have to keep doing in spite of what we're going through in order for my business to survive? Remember, we talked about this being called business continuation instead of disaster recovery. Because if I don't recover or work to make sure certain parts of my business are ongoing to the greatest extent of my ability, recovery or continuation is not going to happen. So what services do my clients need that I cannot ignore, even though we're in the middle of a disaster? Next, what items within my business are most critical? If I am a metal worker, which machine in there can I not survive without? So we'll talk about whether it's repairable or recoverable, but which items do I need to examine first to see what has to be done to make them work? Next, what services can wait? What's a secondary service? What's an add-on that I do as a business that can wait until we're in a better place? If I am a florist, for example, deliveries may have to wait a little bit. If I'm a dry cleaner, same kind of thing. You can come and get them, but I can't deliver right now because I have no working vehicles, and it's not critical to my business. So there's a division here of what is absolutely critical versus what can wait. And again, depending on the department or area you're in within a small business, you may disagree. The owner's going to make the final decision. The owner is the owner of the assets of the business, and their decision, with a little guidance, is going to be final. Another thing to consider is, can the business work out of a remote location? If it's a service-type business, can I operate out of my home? Can I operate out of a trailer? Can I operate anywhere but here? If necessary, for example, agents, with a laptop and a phone, you can work out of a tent in a parking lot, because what people want from you is your knowledge more than anything else. So if you've got a business that is primarily knowledge-based rather than hands-on based, a remote location might be all right. So we have to look at the nature of the business, and the business has to look at its own nature to see, do I have to have this site? Can I work somewhere else? Here's a thing to consider. What information should be filtered to the local news and media? It is a fact of life that we as humans like the sensational. We almost like things to be worse than they are. So when local news or media come out to a disaster area, they're looking for the worst possible scenario. and they're going to talk to people while they're still shaken up, even shattered. So the idea ahead of time is back to that communications person, whoever we assign to handle communications. The idea here is that we decide ahead of time what information and how much information is going to be released. Do you think it's a good idea for a business to stand there and tell the local news, we're destroyed? Well, I don't know that we're ever coming back. Probably not, because that starts putting in the mind of customers, well, maybe I ought to start looking somewhere else. False hope is not any better, but how much information of what nature needs to be decided ahead of time, and then stick to the company line. You want to keep a list of key media contacts, because you do want to manage the message. You also want to get service information out there. You want to say that, hey, we're back up and in business. Remember how we were on the ground? We're back up and running thanks to our great employees and vendors. We're back up and running. So not only do you want to keep the communication person on standby all the time, ready, but you also want to, he or she wants to know who to talk to in the media to keep that message on message, to keep the positivity keep flowing, and to manage what's being said about your business. You want to organize your data. Agencies, obviously you want lost data managed. You want to keep coverage information available. One thing that, and as an agency, that is important to keep available is some kind of list, again as part of your disaster plan, some kind of list of carriers, contacts, basic coverage information. You want to know, for example, what is the company policy regarding debris removal. If you also have personal lines involved, you want to keep information regarding additional living expenses. Those two things will often get mistranslated during a crisis, so that insureds, your clients, are going to hear one thing when you meant to say another. So to have it in writing, even with a prepared script, is ideal. For your businesses, they want to organize the data so that they want to know what has to be done first. They want a list of local repair contractors. They want to know what coverage they have, because when they're dealing with the contractors, they may have to make a decision based on who's paying, their insurance policy or out of their own pocket. So providing coverage information to the clients, making sure that that's part of their business plan, their disaster response plan, is key. So when they're talking to the local contractors, they can go, yes, I've got it right here. I know that's going to be taken care of by my insurance company. No, I need a break. This is coming out of my own pocket. But having the list of local repair contractors, preferably ones they've dealt with before, ideal. Other data that needs to be organized is, again, back on who are their main customers, who do they want to contact, and the emergency contacts there. So organizing data, important part of the process. Then we can talk about preparing your business. Agents, this is the client that we want to talk to, though it works for your own business as well. You want to lock it down, cover it up, and back it up. Sounds easy, sounds simple. Probably not. Nothing is as simple as it seems. So lock it down. Reduce the possibility of a shutdown by utilizing risk management techniques. We talked about the risk management techniques of identify and implement, figure out how you're going to fund. So if there's any way to use duplicates, to use alternative locations, to use backups, that's going to prepare your business to survive a disaster. Lock it down. Is there any way to shut down or lock down various aspects of your business? For example, should a disaster strike, is there a safe, is there a vault in the business that can be locked down to reduce the possibility of theft? Is there a possibility that the computers can be shut down to minimize the possibility of intrusion or by hacking? Do we have a backup of company records on CD, in the cloud, jump drive, however, so that I can access my files, my records, my accounts, even in the middle of a disaster? Needs to be determined. And if it's not done, it's something that should be considered very, very seriously. Consider keeping critical business records in a vault, either on your premises or in a safety deposit box. Is it likely that the business and the bank can be hit at once? It's possible, but a safety deposit box is going to be pretty secure. And the idea is that should the business burn to the ground, should the business be blown away, should a flood sweep everything away, no matter what happens to the business, I am going to have my critical business records either in the vault on my premises, obviously fireproof, tamper-proof, or at the local bank. Again, just as secure as can be. So critical business records, ones I absolutely positively cannot do without, I need to make sure that using risk management techniques, the frequency, severity is low. Loss control measures there. Put everything away. If the disaster strikes during off-business hours, what's laying out in the open? What's not in a vault? What's not in a file cabinet? If everything is put away every evening, and now the storm comes through, then there's less temptation and less opportunity to worsen the loss through vandalism or theft or any other kind of secondary loss. If everything is put away, if everything is locked down, if everything is password protected, if everything is backed up, then there's less opportunity for the secondary loss to occur after the initial disaster. Just a thought. Make a list of active customers. I would not want to be in the position of a small business who depends on every customer to be profitable. I would not want to have to go back and second guess who those customers are. So as part of my list, and part of the list that gets updated on a regular basis, part of that manual is going to be a list of my active customers. And I'm probably going to put, as a secondary, as an aside, I'm probably going to put some kind of code with them so that I know who is the first tier customer and therefore who gets contacted first, who is a second tier customer, therefore in the second round of notifications, and so on down the road. So I can't do that if I don't have a list of my customers. Agencies, you probably need to have a list of your active files, particularly if you're not storing the information in off-site or in the cloud. And even if you are storing somewhere else, it doesn't hurt to have a secondary list of active customers safe away from your office so that wherever anybody is, they can begin making contact. This is a nice way as an agency that you can track down by having a list of active contacts. You know which carrier is going to be impacted the most because they have the most customers in your office, most policies in your office. That gives them a heads up on how much personnel they may have to place on the ground for you. So any kind of list increases your chances of getting priority treatment. Next, prepare to relocate. You may have no choice. You may be told to get out. Your building may be devastated. You may have to move out because of that. Authorities may tell you to move out, that this is now a danger zone. We've got to have everybody out in order to begin recovery and to prevent as much looting as possible. All kinds of reasons why you may have to relocate. You may not have any utility service, for example. Good reason to relocate. But you've got to prepare to relocate. And that means, remember the person who was assigned the responsibility of cleanup and recovery? This is their job. To relocate by determining first what can be relocated. What, as in, is it still usable? Do I have the equipment to relocate, or do I have the equipment on standby? Did I plan that ahead of time? So do I have the resources or the equipment to relocate? What has to be replaced? We'll get into that in a little bit, but sometimes it's not salvageable and you may have to replace, and that's going to require conversation back with the fiscal person, with the financial person, and also a conversation with the administration person. So this is just an indicator of how the communication among the responsibility players plays out. So prepare to relocate. Hopefully you already have a location. You have a way of getting stuff there, whether it's through use of your own employees, whether it's through hiring people, and do we have that lined up so that you don't have to wait in line with everybody else, that you already have got that set up so that when you call, they're going to be there within a certain number of hours. So preparing to relocate is not just, okay, pick up a box and move. It's a whole process that begins long before the disaster happens. It's a matter of getting procedures in place. Now that it's here, now I know who to call, know what we're going to save because I've checked it out, and now we're ready to go. Now you're also going to need to get with a communications person, because the communications person is going to have to let appropriate employees know where you're moving to, where you're relocating to. That communications person is also going to have to let at least the most important customers know where you're relocating to, because you want your customers to be able to find you. Rather important. So again, this is how everybody interacts. Now, we want to check the electric, water, heat, computer, phone. First thing we're going to check is any of this working? Second, if it's working, do I need to turn it off? That's probably going to require, back to the person in charge of cleaning up, that's going to require some phone calls to these various utilities. It's going to require some phone calls to your computer vendors. It's going to require some communication with your phone vendors. With the electric, one thing that people tend to forget is that if lines are down, it doesn't mean they're dead. So there's a protocol involved there. A line is down, you call the company and let them deal with it. At no point in any of this procedure do we ever want to put employees at risk. So first, safety is always first. But given that the scenario is now safe, check these utilities, check these components, the computer and the phone, see if they're still working, see if you still want them to be on or you get them turned off, and with the computer and the phone, how do we get them moved if I have to relocate? This is important because if I relocate without my computer up and running, without it reconfigured, without the licenses and programs reinstalled, it's useless to me. On the phones, what's the status of the cell phone towers? What's the status of my carrier? Can I move everything? Move my landlines, or am I now totally dependent on mobile communications? So having all those numbers handy, knowing what to do with each, very important. Preparing your staff. This is probably the most important and one of the more difficult tasks, because this requires an element of knowledge of your staff that is very, very important. You've got to determine the responsibilities of each person in your employ. Now, if you only have 2 or 3 employees, probably not going to be that hard. But if you have 15, 25, 50 or more, then assigning responsibilities requires an in-depth knowledge of the people who work for you. Everybody is not prepared or qualified to deal with the fiscal responsibility. Everyone is not prepared or qualified to deal with communications. Knowledge of your people will determine who does what. And remember, we had a long list of responsibilities, from communications to media to physical recovery, administration, fiscal. All those things have to be dealt with. And then you have to know which of your people, which of your employees are willing to do, pardon the expression, grunt work. Because you may not be able to get people in to do cleaning and physical work immediately following the disaster, because everybody else is going to be busy too. And so you need to know which of your employees are perfectly willing to come in and do whatever it takes to get the business up and running. From a fiscal aspect, you need to know, or the employees will need to know, are they going to be able to be paid for this? I'll be happy to do grunt work, but I would still like to be paid. Thank you very much. So that's a responsibility that is a responsibility that comes along with doing the work and determining responsibilities. Who's going to need to be paid? Who's going to expect to be paid? Who's going to volunteer just so they can get back up and running again? This requires a full knowledge of your staff. What about temporary staff? Here's the problem. If you need temporary staff, so do a lot of other companies. Secondary problem, what finances do you have to pay temporary staff? Another issue. Every issue has an issue. Another issue is temporary staff. Do you have positions that require extensive training? If so, what good is temporary staff going to do unless they come pre-trained? So that's going to require some pre-qualification, some pre-planning, because if you need staff to do specific expert or semi-expert or complicated, complex tasks, then you're going to need to work with a temporary staffing agency ahead of time to make sure that they're going to have that staff available at any given time. If, however, you have a type of business that works with a trade association or other businesses in your wheelhouse, then you may be able to work with that trade association to find qualified temporary staff. But again, this is the kind of thing that needs to be resolved prior to the disaster happening. So you've got your own staff to take into account. You have temporary staff. The responsibilities for the two are going to have to be somewhat different because, number one, pay scale, number two, responsibilities. Your regular staff should already be aware of what they're doing and what they're going to have to do after a disaster. Temporary staff is going to have to be brought up to speed pretty quickly. Even if it's not to do their specific job, what else may be expected? The next one is list common questions and answers. Agencies, I would like to address you for a moment first. After a disaster, you're going to hear from your clients a lot of very similar questions. Your responsibility as an agent is to make sure those answers match the questions and that the answers match what your carriers would want the answer to be. So this is going to require, again, some training on behalf of your staff in order to help your clients. If, for example, you're asked, How long before I see an adjuster? You won't know unless you've already talked to your carriers to find out what their typical response is, how fast they can get boots on the ground, how fast they can get people into the area. Are they setting up a temporary office? Are they using your office as a kind of a command headquarters? That's one of the first questions. Second question commonly is, when am I going to get some money? Third one is, what can I do? What am I allowed to throw away? You know the most common questions that are going to come after most typical disasters. And most of them have to do with when and how much. So for each of your carriers, you should have some kind of checklist, some kind of response ready so that everybody in the agency, not just the person dealing with the claims, everybody in the agency is going to have the same script for the appropriate carrier. For what you don't want, this is not the time to have to be worried too much about E&O. This is the time to have your script ready and your answers ready and keep the people answering the questions to a minimum. There's fewer chance to go off script at that point. And everybody, depending on the size of the agency, should be ready to quote-unquote handle claims for a short period of time. Otherwise, the one person handling claims that always takes the claims question is going to get overwhelmed. Now, for your clients, they too are going to get some common questions. If, for example, you have a service type business as a client and I have something in there being serviced, then my question is, what about my stuff? I'm going to call the business and go, hey, when can I get my stuff back? And they're going to need to know the answers. And again, this is where somebody is assigned communications responsibility so that they know after communicating with the other responsible parties in the business what the proper answer should be. They don't want to be promising customers that they're going to be getting something back in a day or two when it's probably going to be a week or two, because that's going to cause trauma and ill will among their clients. So the common questions and answers is not just for an agency, it's also for your clients. They're going to get a lot of questions after a disaster happens. They need to have common answers ready. And again, as much as possible, stay on script. One of the things that your clients are going to ask after a disaster is, what can I fix and when? Because to them, getting things fixed is the answer to getting things moving again. So agents, you'll need to know again your carrier's response on temporary repairs. Most property policies do say that reasonable repairs will be covered. You need to know with your carriers if there's a limitation on that. Part of the problem, though, is that they may not be able to find anybody to make the temporary repairs. So the clients have to be prepared to, as much as possible, effect those temporary repairs themselves. So this is where that emergency checklist comes in. Remember we talked about the tarps and all of that? So that's where the preparedness kit comes in and that checklist. But you're going to need to tell them, because they're going to ask, so I've got a hole in the roof, can I fix it? So I've got a machine that doesn't work, can I get it replaced? And you'll need to know what to tell them. They also need to know if temporary repairs cannot be made, where to find a replacement. And if it's critical to their business, they need to accept the answer that if it's critical, you simply need to get it replaced. I don't know how much you're going to get, but you have to make the decision, business owner, whether it's critical to the operation of your business, and therefore whether you maybe have to be willing to foot the bill yourself. Another thing that they're going to want to know is, all right, can I get rid of this stuff? If, for example, there's been water damage, fire damage, smoke damage, that stuff, quite frankly, smells. and they're going to want to know, what can I get rid of? Can I get rid of this debris? Can I get rid of the trash? This is where the agency comes in again with how much does each carrier permit? What is each carrier's response to inspection of property? Most property policies, if not all, indicate that property has to be held for inspection. Otherwise, the carrier may not pay for the damaged goods it wasn't able to inspect. So there's a fine line here between getting rid of stuff and keeping it for inspection by the carrier so I get proper payment as a business owner. My response as an agent would be simply say, if it's that bad, take excellent pictures. Take excellent pictures and then remove it. Understand you may be taking chances. If you as an agent can go out and help them by taking pictures, that's terrific. The one thing as an agent you're going to find is that you're not going to be able to inspect everything. So you're going to have to be prepared as an agent to help your client do a lot of this stuff for themselves. Because if you are the agent of an area that has sustained a disaster, you're going to be pretty darn busy yourself. And so going out to see everybody, take care of everybody, hold everybody's hands physically is probably not going to be possible. But if you can find a way to hold their hands psychically, empathetically, that's going to help. So helping them figure out how to get things done afterwards without jeopardizing any recovery they may have from the insurance carrier is going to be very, very helpful to them. So as a recap of this session, one of the things we talked about was assigning responsibilities, as we're talking about preparing your office, preparing your people for after the disaster. So things you can tell your businesses in brief are assign people responsibilities for taking care of things from financial to administrative to the physical recovery to communications. Another thing is prioritize recovery. Everything is not equally important. So before the disaster happens, before everybody's running around in a panic, figure out what is critical to the survival and recovery of the business. Make sure we have that the most protected, and then that's the thing that we will recover first. So what's critical? Everything's not equally important. If you can work out of a remote location, set it up first. Have that set up ahead of time, whether it's renting a trailer, working out of someone's home, a tent in a parking lot. Doesn't matter. As long as you have the plan in place, that's critical. What are we going to tell the media and thus the public? Because as a business owner, I really want people to know that I am going to be coming back, and I'm going to be coming back as soon as possible. So I need to communicate that through the media to the public. If I had a way of communicating directly to all of my customers, that's even better. And that's why we keep a customers list. When I'm preparing my office, I'm going to lock it down, cover it up, back it up. I'm going to have a secondary defense, if you will, for everything. Put everything away and then get ready to move if I have to move. That involves, again, pre-planning. It goes back to that preparedness manual, that preparedness checklist. And then I want to prepare my staff as the business owner. Who does what? Do I need temporary staff? I want my staff, whether full-time or temporary, permanent or temporary, to understand what questions are going to be asked, what answers they can give. We want everybody now on the same page, working together to get to not only recover from this disaster, but to continue our business in a fiscally profitable manner. So I will do, as a business owner, whatever I can to get my office and my people ready so that when we open our doors again, it's as if nothing had happened. That's our job as insurance agents, to make it as if it never happened, and preparing our clients to prepare their business for disaster is part of that responsibility. I hope you've enjoyed this part 3 of the webinar, and have a good day.